Namaskar. Hello and welcome to P Guru's channel. I'm your host Sri Iyer. I have with me again Nikunj Trivedi, President of CoHNA, and we're going to talk about this new bill that is being introduced in California. Of course, we're going to touch upon this whole caste discrimination saga. Is it a one-sided narrative? How many of these organizations are listening to the other side of the story? Or more simpler, if you were to go into a court and the jury were to decide after hearing one side of the story, do you think justice is being done? This is the question that we are asking of Sri Nikunj Trivedi. Nikunj bhai, namaskar and welcome to P Guru's channel.
Namaste. As always, a pleasure. Thank you for having me again.
So, Nikunj, I am seeing that the whole narrative is being set by one side, and then the actions that follow after that is mostly under the radar, hush, hush, don't tell anyone, don't reveal much. And the times that it has been revealed, the other side gets to get their voice in, their door in, and somehow things don't seem to have the desired outcome. How much of this is a clever way of introducing something that seemingly doesn't seem to affect the majority in the United States and Canada?
Yeah, no, it's a great question, and we always go back to the genesis of this whole thing, right? It was engineered essentially back in June of 2020. Before that, it was the Equality Lab survey, where it started to talk about this grave caste discrimination happening in the United States based on faulty data. So we talk about that first, but the genesis of this has been from the Cisco lawsuit, right? And from that point onwards, we see that there has been these backdoor meetings where only one organization or one group of people can show up, claim that they're oppressed, and then set the entire narrative. So we saw from Cisco, we saw from UC Davis, we saw from Cal State University, Harvard University, Brandeis, so many different places where these policies are just implemented or put together by only hearing one side, as if the other side doesn't matter. The other side is already presumed guilty. So this presumption of guilt is one of the biggest things. And the idea is set by a certain narrative that there are four castes, caste equals Hinduism, Hinduism equals caste, and nothing else. And then what has happened is they start to put this conciliatory remarks inside the bills that, oh yeah, well, castes do exist in other communities. They start out by Hinduism, quoting the Rig Veda, but then they start to say, well, okay, it has its roots in Hinduism, but then again, oh, it's in South Asians, or now it's in South Americans, or now it's in Japanese, or now it's in other communities, African communities and things like that. But if you look at the nomenclature that they use, if you look at the terminology they use, it's all Sanskrit, Hinduism, et cetera, et cetera. So there's this presumption of guilt. And then, as we talked about before, they use the idea that, oh, you know what, there are certain last names or certain dietary habits that are considered casteist. And therefore you can identify someone who is casteist, presumably, by someone's last name and things like that. So that is the narrative that is set. And there's a training that goes on in many of these places in the DEI spaces so that you actually set that narrative at a university level, the policy administrator or a city council, or even now in California state level, right, where Senator Wahab has introduced this new bill, which we'll talk about. So you can see that one-sided narrative, and then they'll throw in one person from the other side, just to kind of say, hey, we did listen to two people, right? And we've had anecdotal information, actual information where we had presentations in front of university officials and they barely listened. They actually gaslighted one Dalit person actually who was opposing this. So, this is how it goes. So this one-sided narrative is being set and engineered and to showcase that there's this grave caste discrimination existing across the entire United States and even in Canada, where the data is just not there. But, that's where we are right now at this point.
And Nikunj and our viewers, I think they need to know what kind of narrative is being set. And we're just going to show you a small clip of one narrative, and we're going to give you the link to the complete clip so you can go and watch the entire thing at your convenience, and then you can make up your own mind. Here we go.
And you don't know a whole lot about what caste discrimination actually is. Don't worry, we will explain in just a moment. But as a starting point, just understand that this movement to ban it has been gradually picking up steam. Several American universities have banned it. And this month, Canada's largest school board in Toronto passed its own motion recognizing caste discrimination as a real thing, causing real harm, becoming the first school board in the country to do so. So, what is caste discrimination?
Caste system originated in South Asia thousands of years back. And caste, according to Hindu religious texts and scriptures, all human beings are born from the body of the caste, body of the god or the creator. The head is supposed to be the birthplace of Brahmins, are the ones who are supposed to be the custodians of learning and knowledge. The shoulders are the birthplace of the Kshatriyas. The second rank caste is supposed to be the in charge of ruling and also the violence in society, social order and rule. Vaishyas and merchants who are involved in mostly in mercantile work or trade and commerce. And feet is associated with Shudras, with people who are supposed to be agriculture laborers and people who are dealing with the various kinds of artisanal activities or physical labor. And in this caste hierarchy, untouchables or Dalits were born out of the caste system. So they have no caste. That's the reason why they are assigned all impure occupations or impure activities to perform in society. In this context, in caste system, the higher you're born in, the more pure you are. The lower you're born, the more impure you are.
It is hard to overstate just how rigid and restrictive this kind of hierarchy can really be. It's literally having your lifelong social status defined at birth.
So it's like caste provides opportunities and also it also closes opportunities for you. Like that's why it's very important. Why caste is important? Because it defines what you are and what kind of education you have access to. If you are in India, in villages, it also decides whether you have access to clean drinking water, whether you can eat, what kind of food you can eat. So caste defines everything about human life.
And even in those parts of the world that have banned caste discrimination, like India banned it well over half a century ago, the idea that people could be ordered and ranked along these archaic and arbitrary lines never really disappeared. It's not hard for a complete stranger to figure out what caste you were born into, and that pride or stigma can be really sticky.
People carry caste mostly through their last names. If you're interacting with an Indian person and Indian origin person, and it's very, even if you're Muslim or even if you're Christian, it's very easy to identify their caste through the last name they carry out. Anyone who has any familiarity will understand that, once you tell the name, full name to a person, he knows whether I belong to their caste or not. On the basis of that, they draw the boundaries.
All right. So that was the end of it. I have a couple of observations, Nikunj, but I'll let you go in first because you're the guest.
No, this came out 2 days ago. So remember, this is from CBC, which is one of the most premier media houses in Canada. Okay, and they covered, this is called a caste explainer. Okay, so they are basically saying, and one of the clips that you may not have seen, but it's right in the beginning, and you did refer to this, is this Asian person is basically referring, saying, for an individual who doesn't understand caste system, don't worry, we're going to explain to you exactly what it is. So, right? So that is really important. So that's a normal Canadian or American who doesn't understand caste. Now all of a sudden is being given an explainer. The explainer basically has multiple issues, right? The first one, he literally has this Professor Chinmaya Jangam talking about caste equals Hinduism. And then they actually show a Hindu deity from which the castes originated, right? So there's 4 castes according to this thing. So a normal reader or normal viewer does not see anything else but Hinduism, Hinduism, and Hinduism in this entire video, number one. Number two, they also associate that with India. And it's very clear. And the guy says a normal person, okay, a regular person, American or Canadian, can easily identify caste just by understanding this. And I would heavily challenge that, because I would challenge him to identify caste just by looking at someone. But again, it gets better, right? So Chinmaya Jangam actually talks about caste being identified by someone's last name. And this particular thing is this is one of the most crucial pieces that we have been concerned about. Because now all of a sudden you have presumption of guilt just based on your last name. So while you may have a last name that can identify you as quote unquote Dalit, you have a last name that can quote unquote identify you as an upper caste. And now all of a sudden, based on this rigid hierarchy as what he's referring to, you are now able to say, hey, you know what? Sri Iyer or Nikunj Trivedi or somebody else can, because their last names are automatically going to discriminate. So you are presumed guilty until you're proven innocent the other way, right? Which is fundamentally different than how the law operates. So you can see the media narrative being set. And there is no other discussion of any other country. So these people who are saying, oh, it's all around South Asia, this, that, another thing. Well, why don't you bring out any other countries in South Asia that have caste discrimination? So the focus is India, the focus is Hinduism, and the idea is that this is an immutable system that not only exists in India, but it exists in the diaspora. And we are all ranked based on that hierarchy.
Thank you, Nikunj. Three things that I saw right away that I want to point to our viewers. First off, the word Dalit did not enter the vocabulary up until 1931. There were, and you go back to Bhagavad Gita, there is Chatur Varna, 4 Varnas. And these, again, Lord Krishna describes that these are not at birth. It is what you go on to become. In fact, there is even more data about that. There is a rishi called Atreya who says that we are all born Shudras. And then when we go to Gurukul and then listen to various teachers, that's when people determine that, okay, this person has a certain keenness in learning a particular thing. And that is how the Varna became for that person. This is how it was. So after thousands of years, clearly somewhere some things went wrong. But how did they go wrong? I can give you example after example after example as to how this has been done because a certain ruling community that came to India wanted to keep the divisions always active and alive, fault lines, exploit the fault lines. You take a look at the word caste. Caste is not an Indian word. India had only Varna and Jati. Jati, the word Jati is nothing but Vigyani in Sanskrit, which meant scientist. Then he became Gyani, which is knowledgeable person. And over time, the word Gyani became Jati. That meant that the person knew something and he could do that very well. Now, let me ask all my Western friends, brothers and sisters, does a baker still bake? Does the butcher still run a meat stall? Is the tailor sewing your clothes? Then why are you suddenly saying that, oh, the last name of somebody from India shows what caste he is, and therefore based on that he is going to be discriminated? So see, this whole narrative is so warped, and clearly there is somebody having a certain agenda that is driving this forward. Another one about how this person is describing all the parts of Brahma and saying that the feet are the Shudra. There's an implied thing there that you are like at the bottom of the totem pole. Nothing could be further than truth from that. You go to any Vishnu temple, there is something called as a Shadari. That is actually his feet. When Lord Vishnu is blessing you, the devotee, he is putting that Shadari on your head. When somebody touches you with their feet, they are giving you the highest blessing possible. Of course, Mr. whoever that person is, he's not going to say all these things. He has picked something from somewhere, and then there is no quote there, no reference there as to how he arrived at this. I'm telling you all the things that I know from just listening and reading up on all these things. So what I'm saying is this thing is bogus. This is somebody wants to make some money, because once this thing becomes law, right, the same equality lab, the same Professor XYZ will come back and say, oh, here is the metrics. This is how you would determine. Hey, listen, you are being the judge, jury, and the executioner here. And is this fair at all? So my question is, where does California go from there? I mean, these things are always being judged, Nikunj, in my opinion, as people who are sitting in judgment over these things. They don't understand it. They are not even bothering to listen to the other side. And all they are seeing is, does this affect me? No. My state? No. My city? No. Oh, it's some immigrants who are fighting among themselves. So what? Let's go ahead and vote for it. This is the most shallowest way these guys can vote. But
Yeah.
try telling them this.
It's actually like profiling. Basically, so what happens is no community out there, doesn't matter which community is it. For example, in the COVID times, right? There was a whole idea of like, oh, this is a Chinese virus and this and that, etc. So there was a lot of racial profiling against people of Chinese origin. Um, just because you're from China, now all of a sudden you're targeted as the purveyor of the COVID, all this stuff, right? Similarly, the Japanese community has faced this in the past. The Muslim community after 9/11 faced this also, where if you had a name. So, for example, I used to have a classmate whose name was Osama. Now, imagine after 9/11, your name is Osama. But did he change his name? No. He said that just because you had an idiot or radical terrorist with the same name as me doesn't mean I'm the same. You cannot assume that I am the same person, right? The African American communities have also faced this, right? Racial profiling. So in many community, like when I talk to my black friends, they will say like, look, my friends, my family, for example, growing up in certain suburbs of Newark or certain suburbs of Chicago, etc., faced this thing because when they were out and about, they were racially profiled. Like, what? Oh, this black person is going around. He must be criminal, right? So all these communities have faced that. And I don't think our issue is any different than that. We are also being profiled by my last name, by what I eat, by how I behave, the religious markers that I may have. So, and it's being put into law. What's really amazing is it's actually being put into law. If you look at the languages that they're using, saying, okay, well, caste is a system of rigidity, all this other stuff. And it, by the way, is present in this community and that community. But when you look at the language, but the language is one thing. What is the presumption? Who is going to implement these laws? If you take a survey of regular Americans or regular Canadians in that matter, I can tell you overwhelming of majority of them think there are only 4 castes, right? What they're referring to is Varna, as we just mentioned. There's thousands and thousands of castes. They vary between states in India. You're not even talking about Pakistan. You're not even talking about Bangladesh, Sri Lanka, etc., which have their own systems and their own castes and things like that. So how are they going to adjudicate? The way they will adjudicate, as you mentioned, they will have judge, jury, and executioner who will, quote unquote, come and train them about how to identify people who are presumed should be guilty. So how do you profile people? These sort of administrators and lawmakers will be taught how to profile people, how to look for markers. And you're going to look for markers based on someone's last name, dietary habits, their religious markers. So all of a sudden, if I have to now change my last name because I may be profiled, like my daughter may have to change her last name, right? Forget about me. My daughter may have to change her last name now because all of a sudden, these types of professors and these types of lawmakers are saying that, if you have this last name, you are presumed guilty, you're upper caste, and your caste is, if you remember in the Dismantling Global Hindutva Conference, Professor Gajendran Ayutrai clearly said he profiled 5 last names, right? Trivedi, Iyer, Sharma, Mukherjee, and Kompella. 5 last names. And he said these are 5 last names who are purveyors of violent Brahmanism. Okay, so imagine someone says that these 5 last names or this name is associated with terrorists. Okay, or these 5 names are serial criminals. How would that fly in today's world? Would that become a law? Would somebody go into a DEI training and say, oh yeah, you know what, let me identify how criminals work. These 5 last names and these 5 types of people are going to be serial criminals. You should be watching out for them. Or this, if you have this name, think about them as a terrorist or whatever, right? That would be banned. That would be like, you will become a laughing stock. You will lose your job. You will be thrown out of an academic university, things like that. But hey, Hindus are open playing field. You can racially profile, you can segregate and profile and essentially target a Hindu by their last name, by their dietary habits, and actually make it into law. And it doesn't matter, it seems like. So for me, this is the biggest concern I have, that a state is defining a religion, which they have tried to do in Cisco case. They said caste is Hinduism. They also took a guy who had a last name, but he was atheist. He is atheist. He actually said that I am an atheist. But they said, no, we think your last name is Iyer, Sundar Iyer, right? I'm referring to Sundar Iyer. We think your last name is Iyer, and therefore you are a casteist, right? And the guy gave top 3 positions, all the top 3 positions were given to Dalit, and millions of dollars of sort of like stock options and things like that were given to a Dalit, but still the guy became casteist apparently. So my question to everybody is, would you like to be the next Sundar Iyer?
It's biting the hand that feeds. I'm also told that the job that was given was actually from the same batch or something like that.
Yeah.
The person that he gave the job to was from the same batch, and this is really, really gross misrepresentation of facts. And I don't know where that Cisco's case is. The first time they filed it, they withdrew it, I believe. I don't know what is happening on that one. But the point again, Nikunj, is once these things get under the spotlight, once you start shining a torch into all these things, you will see that it is baseless. It is the agenda of a few who want to try and ply their trade and try to make a business out of it. And this should be condemned in the harshest ways possible. And that's all I can say at this point of time. Viewers, you can agree with us, disagree with us. I have no problem with that. But if you're going to disagree or agree, feel free to state some facts. We need to be able to get data and then weigh our opinions based on data. Don't just listen to something and say, oh, I heard it here, I heard it there. That's the worst thing you can do. This is something that is essentially a waste of time and a waste of taxpayer money. I pay my taxes in the United States, also in the state of California. So I am rather, upset that the time is being wasted on something that is absolutely bunkum. Anyway, that's just my 2 cents. Nikunj, walk us through I'm hearing that many school districts they are targeting in Canada. This thing is going to spread like wildfire unless this thing is challenged and broken up by piece, deconstructed piece by piece. This is just going to keep rearing its ugly head.
It's already doing it. I mean, remember, if we look at 2020 to 2023, how many institutions have actually passed caste policies, right? How many universities? There's a lot of them. And these are not just some joke universities. They are top of the line, right? Top Ivy League schools. They have passed it. Then on top of that, you have state bodies who are looking at this, right? California being the latest one. Seattle was the one last month, things like that. The point is, there are going to be, this is a train that is going to continue to move forward, right? And if we can deconstruct it, yes, that'll be great. That's where the community needs to step up and say, hey, I am being racially profiled. Think about it, what you said earlier, right? A bunch of people who have no idea about the dynamics of a community are all of a sudden going to be deciding what's wrong and what's right, and profiling these people based on their last names, their dietary habits, their religious markers and things like that. That is a fundamental violation of our civil rights. So now I have to hide my last name. So what, do I got to go to court and basically change my last name and drop my last name? Do I now stop wearing like a bindi or a tilak and things like that? Or maybe even go out in the temple? Because all of these are markers for apparently caste discrimination, according to these people. And so, and I can challenge, you put 10, 15, 20 names in front of them, a diverse group of names, and I would challenge them to identify a low caste name, a high caste name, and things like that. In the CBC documentary, there was a last name of Solanki. Okay. Now, I'm from Gujarat, and I can tell you Solanki dynasty was a very famous dynasty. Okay. So these were Rajput kings. So now how does a Solanki last name become a Dalit last name? And there are reasons behind it because of the colonial, re-engineering of Indian society and things like that. There are last names. So for example, Rawal, Rawal, is a sort of quote unquote Brahmin last name. But Raval can be considered a low caste name. Pariya, Pariyar, is considered a Dalit last name. But Parihar is considered upper caste last name. So now if I put all these in front of some people, some regular Americans, I would have a blast in terms of it's going to be like a party to understand how this last names and first names and things like that really work, and whether they're upper caste or lower caste. And I bet you they have no damn clue. But all they know is Hinduism equals caste.
Absolutely. And viewers, this is not the last time you're going to have a discussion on this, because this needs to be nipped in the bud. Really waste of time for everyone. A country based on meritocracy is getting challenged because some people can't just get it in their head that you have to work hard to find success.
Yeah,
Thank you very much.
sorry, just to there's also no data. My concern is that there's no data available. Again, back to the point that there's only one survey by an organization that has been blatantly anti-Hindu. And the reputable survey that has been done by Carnegie Endowment is just somehow not being used. It's being thrown out of the door. And that's really appalling to me.
So that's what this is, the one-sided, they are becoming, they're wanting to become the judge, jury, and the executioner. And that's where the problem is. You listen to both sides. If you really want to sit in judgment over it, listen to both sides. I bet you cannot decide, because the best thing that has happened has been done already in place, put in place, and it being executed successfully in India. The British didn't have reservations based on your birth. It was the Indian government post-independence that did that. And today, 69% of India is having reservations. So, you don't know anything about this. So please keep your mouth shut and just dump this legislation. And shame on you, whoever this new senator is. She doesn't even know this thing. I can understand if somebody is a PhD, has done some voluminous data to back up the stuff. So thank you very much, Nikunj. I know I'm getting a little emotional here. It's because, you see the nonsense that's out there. And the problem is, people seem to be ready to take this nonsense and peddle it as facts and data. That's where I have a problem.
Agreed.
Anyway, thank you so much. Please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Don't forget to click on the bell button for notifications. Namaskar.
Namaste.